Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for Week 6. This channel is intended for half PPR, so if you got any questions for full PPR or standard, let me know in the comments below. But before we begin, there are some players unranked, mostly due to injury. We got Malik Neighbors on IR, Tyreek Hill out for the season, Cedric Tillman is on IR, out for another 3 weeks at least. Jalen McMillan expected to be out until like week 9 or 10. Brandon Ayuk is out, still not expected back in week 6, maybe by week 8. But Jaden Reed is on IR. Christian Watson is expected to return to practice soon, but for now, I'm not going to rank him. He's been out all year. Rashee Rice is still suspended. Mike Evans, I think, will miss yet again. Last year, he had a hamstring injury that cost him 3 games. This would be his 3rd game missed. And then CeeDee Lamb is technically questionable, but I don't expect him on the field this week. Darius Slayton also got injured last week. Plays on Thursday, did not rank him for this game. There's also 2 teams on bye, so we get off a little bit easy. The Texans are on bye, so Nico Collins, Christian Kirk, Jaden Higgins, and Jalen Noel are unranked. And then the Vikings are also on bye. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Adam Thielen will be inactive this week as well. So that's it for the unranked players. Now let's talk about the matchups this week, where we're back to the charts again. In blue, we got the wide receiver points per game allowed by every defense. On the left, the best matchups. On the right, the worst. And then in red this week, we are looking at how many yards per game each of these teams allow. League average is 140, but there are some really low-end matchups. In my opinion, if you give up more than 160 yards per game to the position, that is definitely an upgrade. And then anything less than 140 is not a good spot. So let's talk about the best spots to be in. Number 1 this year has been overwhelmingly the Dallas Cowboys. No real defense. Even with Trayvon Diggs and Duron Bland somewhat healthy, Matt Eberflus's defense is atrocious. This week, they get the Panthers in Carolina, so definitely upgrade Tet McMillan. Leggett might deserve an upgrade, but Jalen Coker is probably coming off IR this week, and I would rather go Coker than Leggett. So the Panthers receivers, definitely safer options this week, but I think you're only trusting Tet McMillan. In Baltimore, they've also been atrocious on defense, very injured at the moment. A lot of touchdowns available against the Ravens, and they get Puka and Adams this week. Even Tutu Atwell might be a legit start. The Ravens is definitely a matchup you want. So Stafford going off this week. Stafford will be a must start. And then the Giants do rank 3rd and are a little bit closer to the rest of the pack, but definitely an upgrade with 32.6 points per game available. A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith look like much safer options on a short week against the Giants. I would still trust A.J. Brown and Davante despite some of their issues this year. The Raiders in Las Vegas have been pretty good in terms of matchups as well, so Calvin Ridley might have his 2nd good game of the year, and maybe Elik Ayamanor finds another touchdown. Cam Ward will get an upgrade against the Raiders. In Indianapolis, that has not been the best defense either, so wide receivers have been productive, mainly due to a lot of good game script. The Colts are usually winning, and opponents have to throw. So Marvin Harrison Jr. gets an upgrade here. That's where his dad played, so maybe a bit of emotion runs deep. I also think Detroit is a very good spot for the Chiefs receivers this week. They've been pretty bad in the secondary, much better against the run, and we did see Jamar Chase emerge last week. So Xavier Worthy, definitely a good start this week. Tyquan Thornton, Hollywood, and Juju vying for that number 2 target. I think I trust Tyquan the most. He has the highest upside given his deep threat ability. The Titans have also been bad in the secondary, so that Raiders-Titans game might actually turn into a shootout. Jakobi Meyers and Tre Tucker should play better, especially if Bowers is out. That's not a matchup to worry about. In Washington, it's also been an upgrade this season. They were somewhat good at limiting the Chargers last week, but the Chargers' offensive line leads to a lot of those problems. So I'm still a believer that the Commanders are a matchup you want. Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, and maybe even Luther Burden of the Bears deserve an upgrade. Lastly, the best matchup I'll mention that is still giving up more than 29 points per game would be Pittsburgh, who also rank 3rd in yards per game allowed, 176 on average to opposing wide receiver cores. So Jerry Jeudy and Isaiah Bond might look better. Last week they had the toughest matchup on this chart, the Vikings, and this week they're in the plus territory. Perhaps Judy does look better with Dylan Gabriel, but they looked so bad last week, it's hard to trust the Browns pass catchers. I would also like to bring up 4 other teams that are giving up at least 160 receiving yards per game. We have the Rams secondary. They've been torched this season. The Cardinals have given up quite a few yards as well. And same goes for Jacksonville and the Jets. They rank lower, more league average on this chart, but in terms of yardage available, they are in the plus territory in this graph. So let's move on to the worst matchups on the opposite side of the board. We do have the Vikings, who have been terrible for opposing wide receivers. We do catch a break, though. They are on bye. So by far the worst matchup gets taken off the board, and that means the worst matchup available this week would be Carolina against Dallas. Dak has played so well, so I don't think you're benching George Pickens, but he does get a downgrade against J.C. Horn. And then last week we did see Ryan Flournoy emerge with over 100 yards, but Kevontae Turpin was out. Tolbert had a bagel. I don't know if you really trust anyone beyond Pickens. If Lamb comes back, then there's no way you're starting Ryan Flournoy. But in Denver, we all know Patrick Surtain is a nightmare. Their entire secondary is a downgrade, a bottom 3 matchup. So Garrett Wilson probably going to fall way down to earth after his last 2 elite matchups. I don't know if I trust Garrett Wilson to be elite against Pat Surtain. The Chargers have also been good on the season, but not great at stopping Deebo Samuel. Jaylen Waddle is probably still a decent start, but I don't know if I'd trust Malik Washington against LA. The Texans are also a bottom 5 matchup. They are also on bye, so we do catch a break. 2 bottom 5 matchups you don't have to worry about. So I will go a little bit deeper in terms of overall downgrades. If you give up less than 24 points, you're in this next tier, and that includes the Falcons giving up 23.9. They get the Bills, so Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman, a slight downgrade for them. Not many yards available against the Falcons secondary this season. And then New Orleans has also been good in the secondary, but mainly because they're bad against the run. So Stefon Diggs and Kayshon Boutte, maybe not the best spot, but not that terrifying. And then the Chiefs also have been good, but especially against top number 1 receivers. I still think you're starting Amon-Ra, but perhaps the door is open for J-Mo to finally get back in the end zone. If Tesla doesn't vulture him, maybe J-Mo isn't that bad. But overall, the team gets a downgrade. San Francisco has also been good in the secondary, so I think you're still starting Egbuka, but I'm not sure I would trust Chris Godwin this week. And then Miami, also kind of tough. They're terrible against the run, so I don't know if I believe this, but Ladd, QJ, and Keenan on paper get a bad spot. The Dolphins have only given up 114 yards per game on average to the position. Shockingly, that is bottom 3 on this chart. Maybe it's legit, but Seattle has also been a very bad secondary. They moved up the board significantly after Baker Mayfield torched them, so I think it's actually much more difficult than this ranking would suggest. Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter haven't been the safest plays. I don't know if I would trust them against the Seahawks. But lastly, the final matchup giving up less than 25 points per game to opposing wideouts would be Buffalo, and they are a bit more vulnerable against the run. So maybe it's a heavy Bijan game like it was in primetime against Minnesota, but Drake London and Darnell Mooney might not be the best options you can find. I also want to bring up 3 other teams that are more league average but give up less than 140 receiving yards per game. Cleveland has a good secondary. Tampa Bay also has a good secondary. And then the Packers have also been really good at stopping opposing wideouts in terms of yardage. So that is it for the matchups to bring up this week. Let us move on to my rankings, where number 1 and 2 is a no-brainer. I'm not going to change my tune on this tier. I still have Puka and Amon-Ra locked in to 1 and 2. It just feels like the safest bet. Puka is number 2 among all NFL players in fantasy points, just behind Jonathan Taylor. He's the clear wide receiver 1, overwhelmingly above the rest of the pack. Against Baltimore, he should crush with probably over 25 points. Number 2 with Amon-Ra, even though it's the Chiefs, I don't give a shit. Amon-Ra in primetime is pretty much matchup proof. I would expect him to get back in the end zone. Last week he did not score, but he has the most touchdowns of any receiver on the season, and he also had 100 yards last week. He is bust proof, a must start Giving him a good run for his money for the number 2 ranking this week would be Emeka Egbuka, my favorite part of my subscriber league roster. I love that I took the stance on Egbuka and paid up with 3rd round draft capital in our auction league. He is so good. Last week was confirmation. I don't think his role is going to change as the number 1 wideout in Tampa, even when Evans comes back. He is locked in to elite production. He stayed all 4 years at Ohio State. He set all of the records at that institution, and I plan to keep ranking him top 5, even when Evans does return. Last season, whether Godwin was healthy or Evans was the guy, Baker sustained a top 3 fantasy wide receiver all through the year. I don't think that's going to change. Baker is a guy I want to bet on. And Egbuka just looks so effing good. Egbuka is the real deal. Egbuka at number 3. I was tempted to rank him above Amon-Ra. Number 4, I'm going with Davante Adams at Baltimore. We brought it up. This matchup against the Ravens is the 2nd best on the season, and off the loss with an extra few days to prep, Sean McVay's game plan is going to be elite. And on the season, Adams actually ranks as wide receiver 6 in targets, an average of 9.2 targets per game. Stafford's on a heater. There's at least 2 passing touchdowns available every game for the Rams. And this week, I could legitimately see 4 or 5 touchdowns thrown by Stafford. So love Adams this week. You have to start both Rams wideouts. You already were, but this week they both get an upgrade. I think Adams is locked in as a top 10 play rest of season. If he's wide receiver 6 in targets, you cannot bench Davante Adams. At number 5, I got JSN, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, going on the road at Jacksonville, a long road trip, not ideal, but he looks so fantastic. He's yet another Ohio State wide receiver ranked in the top 5. Him and Egbuka look super dominant this season. So I'm sure he's happy about Sam Darnold moving from the Vikings to Seattle. Last week, Darnold looked amazing, and JSN is reaping the rewards. His hype coming out of college has really proven to be correct. He looks amazing, pretty much unguardable against everyone. He has 3 games this year with over 100 yards, and in the 2 other games, he has at least 90 yards in both of them. He is phenomenal. He also has 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games. If the touchdowns keep firing at a 65% rate, then he's going to be a top 5 option all year. I think I'd rather have JSN than Justin Jefferson rest of season, because I don't know for sure what the quarterback situation is in Minnesota. If you told me it's Carson Wentz rest of season, then I think I'd rather have Jefferson. But I do expect McCarthy back under center at some point, and that eliminates some of the floor for Jefferson. I think JSN is in a better situation, and I'm sure Jefferson might be missing Sam Darnold. JSN is amazing. If you drafted him, you got to be ecstatic to have him on the roster. One of the best picks in the 3rd round this season. At number 6, we got Drake London versus Buffalo, who exited week 1 with a shoulder injury late. He was bad in weeks 2 and 3, but then in week 4, he was back to 10 targets, had 8 catches, 110 yards, and a touchdown, 20 fantasy points. If you waited on London, if you didn't trade him away, the patience did prove to be worth it. So I think off the bye, he's going to be 100% healthy. I think weeks 2 and 3 was because of the shoulder injury. And Atlanta is definitely going to need to score a lot to hang with Buffalo. And I did pick them to win. Maybe that doesn't happen, but I think it's a close game. And I see a lot of points from the Falcons offense. They're coming off the bye. They should have an effective game plan. And I know I mentioned the Bills are a bottom 11 matchup this week, but I don't really care. I think similar to Stefon Diggs, London will go over 100 yards. He is a must start, in my opinion. The preseason upside we expected to be there was confirmed in week 4. Rest of year, London is a top 10 play. At number 7, I have Romeo Doubs of the Chicago Bears. Coming off the bye, he should be even more entrenched as the top wideout, but I will acknowledge he's a bit touchdown dependent. His rate of 1.25 touchdowns per game is the highest among all wide receivers on a per game basis, but I do trust that Caleb Williams favors him above any other teammate in Chicago. So I don't know if he sustains top 5 numbers on the year, but I do think he's established himself as a must start in your lineup. The Ben Johnson wide receiver 1 sounds like a safe bet to remain top 10 at the position. I will still be trusting Romeo Doubs as a top 10 play. With CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, and Justin Jefferson out this week, I do think Rome is clearly a top 7 play. At number 8, I think Xavier Worthy is going to have his best game of the season versus the Lions. Worthy was pretty mediocre last week, but I think it's just the Jags matchup actually being legit. They have had a good defense all season. However, despite only 51 total yards from Worthy last week, he still had 10 opportunities, 10 plays where they designed him to get the ball. And that's the second week in a row where that's happened. The last 2 games since returning from the shoulder injury, he has 17 targets and 3 rush attempts. That's an average of 10 chances per game to get the football. So in 2 games returning, I think the volume is safe enough to keep betting on. I know last week was a little disappointing, but against the Lions, they have been a very good matchup. Just look at Ja'Marr Chase last week. There's some truly elite upside for Xavier Worthy in primetime on Sunday night. So I think the Chiefs are in must-win territory. They can't really afford to fall to 2-4. And even if they do lose, I think they're putting up a very competitive fight on offense. If it wasn't for the pick 6, they probably would have won last week. And I think they put up a very strong game on offense against Detroit. So I could see a Ja'Marr Chase level upside here. I think against Detroit, you have to trust the volume. Worthy is a must start. I think he's a top 10 option in week 6 against the Lions. Number 9, Ja'Marr Chase, who just faced off against Detroit, comes in. And I think the trade for Joe Flacco really doesn't move the needle. In my opinion, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a stab wound. And speaking of stab wounds, if this doesn't work out with Flacco, I have heard that Mark Sanchez is probably looking for a new job. So maybe that's their next savior, but for now, at least Flacco invigorates the locker room, gives them some upside and hope, but I really don't think it changes very much. I still think Browning is on relatively equal footing as Flacco in terms of backup options. So not expecting that much to change. If anything, it was just the matchup that really boosted Ja'Marr Chase's value. And if you held strong, it was a reminder that you should continue to trust him. He's just too talented. The volume will be there. I would expect another 10 plus target performance from Ja'Marr. And even though it's the Packers, it's not a good matchup here. I still think garbage time will cover you from a floor standpoint. So there's always upside. The touchdown probably hits. It's probably such a big score on the other side of the ball. The Packers defense eases up in the second half. I expect Ja'Marr to get targeted heavily down the field. So keep him in the lineup. He is the only Cincinnati Bengal you can trust. At number 10, we have George Pickens at Carolina. And assuming CeeDee Lamb does stay off the field, then Pickens is a lock in your lineup, definitely a top 10 play. Although he was somewhat limited by the Jets, he still had a deep touchdown to save the day. And although it's not the safest path to 12 points, it feels like his floor with Dak Prescott. Dak is playing at an MVP level, and I'm not going to question it. Even against J.C. Horn, it's not that bad of a matchup for me to move the needle. It is ranking bottom 2 against the position on the year, but part of that has been due to volume. And last week, Jaylen Waddle still went over 100 yards and a touchdown on the Panthers. So I would not be benching George Pickens in week 6. While he gets a slight downgrade against the Panthers, I just think the nature of the Cowboys wide receiver 1, that alone is enough to keep starting. You got to trust Pickens, especially if Lamb remains inactive. At number 11, you're going to keep trusting Deebo Samuel versus Chicago. Terry is making progress and should return for Monday Night Football. That's what the Commanders are expecting. But even if he does, I've seen enough from Deebo to keep starting him. He's just so productive. Cliff Kingsbury's offensive scheme is so dynamic, and Jaden is healthy. And at worst, Daniels is a top 10 quarterback. The production will be there. I'm not worried about Terry stealing volume. So this game, I think, is more likely a shootout than a low-scoring game. I think the Bears offense off the bye will be pretty good. So I don't think you can fade Deebo. I see a touchdown basically locked up for him. And the Bears are reeling in the secondary. They've been very banged up. Jalen Johnson is still on IR. So no concerns. Deebo cannot be faded in your lineup. There's no way you're benching Deebo Samuel. At number 12, I think Courtland Sutton has earned must-start status. Dating back to last year, he's been a top 10 wide receiver since the second half with Bo Nix. So it's looking like a third season with at least 8 touchdowns in this offense. And we were a bit worried about his matchup last week against Quinyon Mitchell. He still had 99 yards, and he's still the go-to target for Bo Nix. So even against Sauce Gardner, I'm not going to panic. Gardner has not been the most lockdown corner this season. There have been some good games against him. So in London, maybe you're worried about the jet lag, but don't be. The Broncos flew to the UK right after the Eagles game, and they will be well acclimated to the time change. So not going to worry about it. The matchup is a slight downgrade. That's why he's not top 10 for me this week. But I think rest of season, he's kind of earned a weekly top 15 rank. I think he's also relatively matchup proof from a floor standpoint. I think he's a weekly number 2 receiver, a constant top 20 option under Sean Payton in Denver. At number 13, I have Jaylen Waddle versus the Chargers, and Waddle proved all my doubts wrong last week. I did tell you to start him. He was one of my favorite flex options. I ranked him at number 22, but I was worried about the J.C. Horn matchup, and that was an overreaction. He definitely performed well. I was a bit too cautious on ranking him at 22. So I'm losing some confidence in the Chargers' elite defense at the moment. I don't think it's as bad of a matchup as the stats would suggest. And the Chargers also have to go on the road to Florida across the country for an early game, 10 a.m. Pacific time. With Tyreek Hill out, Waddle becomes a must start going forward. Last week confirmed it. He's probably just like Sutton, a weekly top 15 option. Very safe production is expected for Jaylen Waddle. The volume will be there, and I trust Mike McDaniel's system to keep at least one receiver viable. It's clearly Jaylen Waddle, so can't bench him. Last week was confirmation. No worries rest of year on Waddle. At 14, I will be starting A.J. Brown this week. The volume is there, but the production is not. I'm not going to read too much into a bad game, though, against Patrick Surtain. That happens with everyone. Just look at Jamar Chase and his bounce back last week. I ranked Jamar also at 14 last week, so I'm not going to panic, but obviously the season-long production for A.J. Brown are trends that are not that encouraging. I know you're frustrated, but there's no reason to be afraid of the Giants matchup. It ranks top 3 against the position, and I feel like I'm underestimating A.J. Brown by potentially 10 spots. If you told me he was the wide receiver 1 on the week, it wouldn't be that shocking. He definitely has the talent to do it, but he's just not lived up to the expectation. It would be a bit surprising, but not a total out of nowhere shocker. So I still think he's worth a start. The Giants matchup is just too good. And coming off the loss, you expect some things to change. It is the Saquon revenge game, but a year removed from the acquisition and free agency, I don't know if it carries the same level of weight. I expect Brown to play well as long as the volume is there, like it has been the last few games. I think it'll click. I think there'll be at least one deep pass down the field. I'm not going to completely hit the panic button just because he played poorly against Pat Surtain. That happens to pretty much everyone across the NFL. So you take the lumps, the good with the bad. It's unfortunate, but Brown should have a good game. I would expect against New York for him to blow up. So I will start him. I'm not that excited about it, but I will trust his talent to eventually win out. The Eagles should win this game. At 15, I have Tetairoa McMillan versus Dallas, and I thought I was just going to automatically rank every number 1 receiver against Dallas in the top 5, but Tet has not lived up to the highest ceiling you can imagine. The floor is very safe for Tet, pretty much locked into 8 to 10 targets every week. Against Dallas, you have to upgrade him. The matchup is just so good. But he also does not have a touchdown on the season. And if you told me Bryce Young favors Leggett or Coker in the red zone this week, or just Dowdle hogs all the touchdowns, I also wouldn't be that surprised. So I think the floor moves up for Tet, so does the ceiling, but he is yet to really eclipse that like elite production. I think this will be his breakout game. It's definitely the most likely matchup for that to happen. So I think against Dallas, you have to start the opposing top wideout. So definitely Tet needs to be in the lineup, but will I rank him top 10? Clearly not. I just haven't seen that level upside from McMillan as of yet, but I like his talent. I was a believer entering the year, and I think at some point those touchdowns will click. This is the week. Tet McMillan should be top 15 at the position. At number 16, I think Marvin Harrison Jr., another Ohio State wide receiver, should be started this week. I don't want to read too much into this, but from an emotional standpoint, I think the return to Indianapolis for Marvin Harrison may play a factor. This is where his dad played in his Hall of Fame career, so Harrison also grew up in Indianapolis. And I know that he can always disappoint you. He's not the safest bet, but the last 2 weeks he has stepped up in a pretty significant way. 98 yards last week on 4 catches was definitely encouraging. I would like to see the volume go up for him. He only has 1 game with more than 6 targets on the season, but the Cardinals just took the most embarrassing L of the year, and I do think they come out on fire off of that loss. So I think Marv has a good game, and if he doesn't score a touchdown for the Colts crowd, that feels like a missed opportunity. It's a cross-conference matchup. It'll be like 8 years before he plays in Indianapolis again. So I think they'll take advantage of the opportunity here. I think this game means something to him, and I think he's a top 20 play. I expect him to find the end zone against the Colts. I would start him. At 17, I got Stefon Diggs at New Orleans, and Diggs has been phenomenal the last 2 weeks. I ranked him top 20 last week. He definitely paid off. That was a very good call to tell you to start Stefon Diggs. It's now back-to-back games with over 100 yards on 19 targets, 16 catches, an average of 124 yards per game the last 2 weeks. He has still not scored a touchdown on the season, but over the last 2 games, an average of 16.3 points per game is fantastic. Definitely top 10 numbers at the position. But I don't know if this game is going to be as important to him, so I don't know if this is the spot to expect that touchdown, and odds are he probably doesn't go over 100 yards every single game. So I still think he's worth starting. He looks like the clear go-to target for Drake May moving forward, and the Patriots offense looks pretty productive. I would trust that top target in New England, especially as May continues to improve. I want to bet on this offense. I trust Diggs from a floor standpoint. I think he's bust-proof right now, and I would keep starting him. Drake May really likes him. At number 18, I have Ricky Pearsall at Tampa Bay, who is questionable, did miss last week with an injury, but I think part of it was because of the Thursday game. Limited time to recover. I think they were just being cautious, and it worked out. They won the game without him or Jauan Jennings. So I don't think his injury is as serious as Jauan Jennings' injury status is. So I do expect Ricky to play against Tampa Bay. You need to monitor his practice reps, need the confirmation by Friday to know for sure. In a game against Baker Mayfield, it's much more likely to be a shootout than a low-scoring affair. So Mac Jones, I think, will get the start. It sounds like the reports are indicating both Brock Purdy and George Kittle will not be returning until week 7. And I actually think the offense is a little bit more productive with Mac Jones this year. So I am not worried about the quarterback situation. I think Pearsall will suit up. And if he does behind CMC, he's clearly the number 2 target for the Niners. So as long as he plays, as long as he is healthy enough to suit up, I think he's a top 20 option. Should be a lot of volume. Against Tampa, there's tremendous upside. The floor is also very high. I think Pearsall's bust-proof as long as he's active for the Niners. Start him if you got him. At 19, I think you should also keep starting Michael Pittman Jr. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And he is kind of touchdown dependent this season, but the Colts offense is pretty prolific so far, and he clearly has the best connection with Daniel Jones other than Tyler Warren. Maybe Tyler Warren is above him, but Josh Downs is beginning to emerge, so perhaps that does eat into some of his upside. However, Pittman has been far more consistent dating back to week 1. Pittman has been the guy in the Colts offense. So I don't see a reason to fade him. Maybe you're a little worried about the volume, but the Arizona matchup is not the best you can find. It's not a downgrade either. Last week, they did not stop Calvin Ridley. So I still think Pittman will be okay. His touchdown odds are relatively high every week, and I do want to be betting on the Colts offense in some regard. So I love Taylor in the lineup this week. Tyler Warren is a must start, and I think Pittman maintains starting value. I don't think he's a lock to finish top 20, but I also think his floor is going to be in the top 30. At worst, I think Pittman is a relatively high flex option, and the floor feels pretty safe. I think the touchdown will hit yet again. The Cardinals don't scare me too much, so I think he'll keep producing good numbers. I can't really think of a reason to panic or worry about him. Like I said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Keep starting Pittman. It's been working out. I think it'll continue with Daniel Jones. At number 20, I have DeVonta Smith at the Giants, and he went off last week, and he did benefit from the bad matchup opposite A.J. Brown, so given it's much easier against the Giants, I would expect him to be relegated to the number 2 weapon behind Brown this week. And he's always kind of big play dependent. However, Hurts usually connects with him on at least one deep pass down the field every game, and I would expect that to continue. The Giants are a top 3 matchup, and it's not like you feel super confident in A.J. Brown. So I expect this to be more of a Brown game, but if you told me Davante has another 100 yards and a touchdown, not going to be surprised. The new offensive coordinator in Philly is a bit reactive from week to week, and I could see Davante kind of falling off, but I think we get such a good matchup here. Even though the vibes in Philly are strange, I'm going to trust DeVonta Smith. He's really talented, and he is not the problem in Philadelphia. Weird shit's going on with A.J. Brown and Saquon, but Davante is still looking pretty good. I think this matchup is a big enough upgrade to trust him in the lineup. I would fire him up. I think he's top 20 against the Giants on Thursday night. At 21, 22, and 23, I have all 3 Chargers receivers at Miami. And I'm going to rank Ladd McConkey above Quentin Johnston and then have Keenan Allen as the third option, because I was at the Charger game on Sunday and Ladd was the only bright spot from a disgusting game on all fronts. They let him down with a penalty on his punt return touchdown. I think they get him back in the end zone. He's too good to not get the usage. So he looked like he was coming on pretty strong last week, especially given how bad they played. I think this is a get-right game for the offense against the Dolphins, and I do think Ladd will start to reemerge as a more safe bet in this passing game. Behind him, I do have Quentin Johnston, and maybe they do make an effort not to let QJ lose confidence. They might force feed him the ball after last week's fumble, but it's possible his target share starts to diminish given the fumble. If it becomes a trend, if he starts dropping passes again, then Herbert will lose his trust, and I do see the offense moving away from him. So maybe the fumble is cause to panic, but I'm not going to overreact to just one rough game. I still think they want to get him involved at a high rate. So I would start him. I also think some of the younger players might have a little better traction in this matchup. They have to travel all the way across country for an early game. They've also had a lot of travel to Brazil, to New York, back home, and now back to the East Coast in Florida. And Keenan Allen is 33 years old. So perhaps the veteran does take a slight back seat, but I would still trust all 3 of them in the lineup. The Dolphins are technically a downgrade on paper, but I don't think they're actually a defense to worry about. So I think Herbert plays well, although the offensive line is a major problem and the pressure rate is going to be really off the charts again. I still think Herbert can distribute the ball at a high rate. Omarion Hampton is out, and I'm not sure they trust Kimani Vidal and Hassan Haskins. So I understand there's some risk. There's usually one of these 3 players that lets you down, but I expect 2 of them to hit. And in my opinion, I think Ladd and Quentin Johnston will have the best games. But I still think Keenan, from a floor standpoint, is bust-proof. I still think Keenan will be fine. So I would start all 3. My preference would be Ladd. And I think after last week's failed punt return touchdown called back from a penalty, I think they'll get him the ball, get him back in the end zone. I think Ladd is my favorite play of the Chargers wideouts against Miami. At 24, I'm going to start Brian Thomas Jr. this week. Thomas did click on one deep play with Trevor Lawrence. So the connection is building. He had a really tough matchup against the Chiefs, and he looked decent despite the downgrades. But he also gets another terrible matchup here versus Seattle. Reek Woolen is not a good shadow option, so I'm not expecting his best game of the year, but I do think he is building some confidence with T-Law in Jacksonville. So maybe the Seahawks traveling across country also leads to some fatigue, like I mentioned for the Chargers going to Florida. They did just get torched by Baker and Egbuka, so you can have some good games on Seattle, but I'm not sure I trust Brian Thomas Jr. with the same level of confidence. I haven't seen enough from him to put him in the tier we expected when we drafted him, but he is moving up the rankings a little steadily. He will crack the top 20 pretty soon, but I need to see it. I need to see him find the end zone again. There's also Travis Hunter starting to emerge a little bit. So the passing game is getting better. I think he's either a buy low candidate or a player to remain patient with. He still has elite potential, but this matchup keeps him outside the top 20. Not the best spot against Seattle and that elite secondary, most of the time, they do really limit you on offense in the passing game. At 25, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Matthew Golden is a excellent start this week. Call me crazy, but I believe this is the Matthew Golden breakout game. He's been on the cusp of some massive plays, but some overthrows and even underthrows have not led to the best outcomes. And typically, rookie wide receivers are known to make significant improvements over the bye week, especially in the second half of the year. So maybe it's not going to happen yet. Maybe we need to wait until after Halloween. But I do believe during the bye, they developed a lot of extra chemistry. They want to set up some packages for Golden in this matchup against the Bengals. I think it could be similar to the Broncos game where the Bengals are just so trash. Their defense takes care of business. And as the game gets out of hand, they will spotlight their young rookie first round pick. It's going to be similar to RJ Harvey. The rookie had an excellent game against Cincinnati. I expect the Packers rookie to have an excellent game as well. So I am worried long-term about the Packers receiver room, especially with Jaden Reed coming back by week 10 off IR. That'll throw a wrench into things. Christian Watson is also expected to be practicing this week and will return in the next 3 games. So that's not good, but until it happens, I think Golden has an opportunity in this matchup to really step up. And I do think Matt LaFleur will take his chances down the field. They chuck it deep. And this week, I think it's going to Matthew Golden. I would start Golden versus Cincinnati. At 26, I'm going to drink the Kool-Aid and tell you to start Calvin Ridley. I think as a flex play, he is a very good start because of the matchup. I am still worried that the first 4 games were the main trends that will happen this year from Ridley. But if you really look at it, some of his matchups were just so difficult, it kind of makes sense why he struggled. Cam Ward did play more effectively last week. They did luck their way into a win, but against Arizona, it wasn't the best matchup. Ridley was banged up, didn't practice most of last week, and he was a game time decision. He played and put up over 100 yards on just 5 receptions. So Ward looks for him down the field. Some of the upside I was betting on in the preseason is starting to hit. Cam Ward is by far better than Will Levis. So it's about time they got their first win, so their confidence is building. And the Raiders defense, don't pretend like it scares you. The Raiders have been an excellent matchup. They rank top 4 in terms of spots for opposing receivers, 31 plus points per game to opposing wideouts this year. Ridley should have another good game. So he still hasn't found the end zone. I'd love to see that. If that happens, you'll be really ecstatic. But even if it doesn't, I think 80 plus yards is not the worst bet. I think Ridley has a very safe floor because the matchup is so good. And last week gave you some confidence that you can start to trust him. I think he's an excellent flex play, a top 30 option in a top 4 matchup. I would start Calvin Ridley. At 27, I think I'd also start Terry McLaurin versus Chicago, but he is still questionable, not a lock to play on Monday. But according to Dan Quinn, it sounds like they're optimistic he'll be back on Monday night. So while he has missed the last 2 games, I'm sure the rest will pay some dividends. I'm sure it will help him. And Jaden Daniels is healthy again. The Bears defense is pretty terrible. I expect a lot of points from the Commanders offense. And with Jalen Johnson, the Bears top corner, remaining on IR, I do not see any reason to fade Terry McLaurin. I know he's been terrible the first 3 games, but I think the rust is going to be shaken off. I still expect him to crack 1,000 yards on the season. That's been a 5-year streak of doing that, and he has been pretty bad so far. He needs to pick up some ground if that's going to repeat this season. So I expect it will happen. I think Terry will bounce back soon enough, and off of the rest, I think he'll be good to go. I think Terry will be a good flex play, but I do trust Deebo a lot more in Washington. That is the only concern. Maybe Deebo doesn't share those touchdowns. But at number 28, I think DK Metcalf is also a very high floor play. Metcalf is not getting elite volume, only 5.5 targets per game so far from Rodgers. And I assumed it would be closer to 9 per game entering the year, so that does lower his weekly floor, but DK has been very productive on limited volume. When he does get the ball, it's usually downfield and it's usually clicking. The catch percentage is pretty high for DK Metcalf, and last time we saw him, he had an 80-yard touchdown in Dublin. That's not going to repeat too often. If it happens, it's pretty nice. It pads the numbers a lot, but he also has 3 touchdowns in 4 games with Aaron Rodgers. So he's definitely the top target and Calvin Austin is also banged up, might not play this week. I don't love the Cleveland matchup. Denzel Ward is a good corner, but I do see a very safe floor available for Metcalf, and I don't really envision a scenario where he burns you. I think Rodgers is playing too good to deny Metcalf has very safe production this season. So I consider Metcalf a weekly flex play with upside. Just wish he was getting more volume. At 29, I have Khalil Shakir at Atlanta, and Shakir in the last 2 weeks is starting to reemerge as Josh Allen's top target. It's not overwhelmingly in his favor, but like last year, he's looking like a very safe bet for at least 9 points every single week, and that's a very decent floor. It's pretty bust proof. You can't complain about 9 points, but it's not the most exciting outcome. But in Buffalo, there's always touchdown appeal, and the Falcons are also great on defense, especially against the run. I do think Allen will need to throw it a bit more. So if James Cook is limited at all, touchdowns will be more likely to go to Shakir. Even if he doesn't crack 10 points, I really never expect him to give you less than 8, and that keeps him in the flex conversation. The Falcons game could turn into a shootout on Monday night. I think there's a lot of upside. Give me Shakir as a top 30 flex play at the Falcons. Not the best matchup, but from a floor standpoint, I consider Shakir pretty bust proof. I also think Olave is in the exact same situation, just Olave does it with extra targets. He gets the Patriots this week, so Christian Gonzalez might be his toughest matchup all season. It might be his worst game so far this year, but Olave is still top 3 in the NFL in total targets, but he is just consistently mediocre every week. Even with a touchdown in week 4, he has still never gone over 11 points this season. So that's not exciting, but on the flip side, he has also never gone under 8 points. It's one of the most steady, consistent floors. He is bust proof, but he also has no upside. So if all you need is 9 points, then be my guest. Go ahead and start Chris Olave. But if you feel desperate for 20 plus, if that's what you're chasing, just upside, he is not the guy to do that with. I'd rather go Rashid Shaheed if I'm trying to get a 20-point game. So I am worried about Gonzalez, but Rattler continues to heavily target Olave near the line of scrimmage. But I will acknowledge you're pretty much guaranteeing just 6 catches for like 55 yards. That's pretty much like clockwork, the outcome for Chris Olave. If he somehow scores a touchdown, you'll be very happy about it. But when he did, that was the game he only gave you 20 yards. It's pretty annoying with Olave, but you can't be upset. You never get burned with a bad outcome. It's just never good. It's always mediocre. At 31, we have Jameson Williams at Kansas City, and because of his bust potential, I just can't rank him any higher. But if you told me he went off for 25 points and put up a top 10 performance, I would not be surprised at all. The Chiefs on paper are a bottom 10 matchup, but really it's mainly a downgrade for opposing number 1s. We've seen number 2s have to step up. Even Travis Hunter had a pretty good game last week against Kansas City. So I think Amon-Ra will get the majority of the double coverage and JMO will be needed. Last week was a specific game plan where they were showcasing David Montgomery. In primetime against Kansas City, I expect a bit of a shootout, and I expect JMO to get some targets down the field. I don't think he'll be completely disappearing with just 1 target every week. So in the live stream on Tuesday, someone asked if they can drop Jameson Williams. I wouldn't do that. I think if you did, everyone else would be clamoring to pick him up. His upside is just too high, but I understand the sentiment. You got to be upset. If you've been starting him, he's been burning you with the exception of week 2 against Chicago. So not a safe play by any stretch, but if he doesn't burn you, the upside is literally 30 points. And that's where I think against Kansas City in a likely high scoring game, I do think JMO will be required to contribute. So the new offensive coordinator is not helping him. I also think Isaac Tesla's touchdowns are really a big red flag, especially if Tesla starts to get more targets every week. JMO is not going to be a big focal point of the offense. So that's just really disappointing, but I still want to acknowledge how he can win you your entire week. This feels like a game where you don't want to fade him too much. So there's so much risk. I can't rank him top 30. That's why I'd rather go Olave. The floor is so much safer with someone like Shakir or Olave, but there's no chance they have the same ceiling as JMO. So if you're feeling desperate, if you're projected to lose big time, go ahead and start JMO. I think it's worth the risk. But if you wind up with a bagel or less than 2 points, that's also not that big of a shock. He is the new Gabe Davis of the NFL, either 2 points or 20. At 32, another player in the same category, Zay Flowers, is a major liability for either 2 points or 20. But interestingly enough, even with Cooper Rush last week, when the team was dog shit, he still had over 70 yards. That's been his floor in 3 out of 4 games. He has eclipsed that number. And if that's going to remain consistent with Cooper Rush, then I do think I might be underestimating Flowers. But I still acknowledge his capacity to burn you. If he gives you less than 20 yards again, no one would be surprised. That's always something to expect from Zay Flowers. And it happened in his 3rd game of the season. If the 33% chances continue, then he is due for a really bad game in week 6. So I'm not excited, but on paper, the Rams matchup has been really vulnerable. They give up more than 160 yards per game to the position this year. And I could see him having a Kendrick Bourne level game. If he gets all the volume, then Cooper Rush could keep him viable. The Rams secondary is not scary. So he's dynamic enough to hope for the good outcome, but he's also a little inconsistent enough to expect a rough spot every now and then. And if you told me, just like JMO, he gives you less than 5 points this week, no surprise at all. So buyer beware, very boom bust. I think this is clearly the low end flex territory, and I wouldn't be excited to start him, but I do think Flowers is a decent flex play, more likely than not remains in your lineup. At 33, however, I do have Garrett WIlson versus Denver, and I think he's one of the last flex plays I would consider. Versus Denver, it's always a downgrade. It's just not a surprise. Every receiver should be faded against Pat Surtain. So the last 2 games, he's had 2 top 5 matchups for the position against Miami and Dallas. He did pay off as expected, but the touchdown rate he's put up this season is pretty unsustainable. Definitely not what we expected. 4 touchdowns in 5 games feels destined to fall off for Garrett WIlson. So in this game, I definitely don't expect a touchdown, but it's still really obvious the Jets offense only trusts WIlson in the passing game, and the volume is still probably going to be there. I still think, like Flowers, 70 yards is not the worst bet to make for Garrett WIlson. But if he does burn you, it's because of Pat Surtain. You can definitely see that coming. And with that risk level, he's not a top 30 play, despite being top 10 each of the last 2 weeks in my rankings. He's rather matchup dependent, in my opinion, and he's really benefiting from 2 elite spots the last 2 games. If you can sell high on WIlson, I would consider doing it. There might be a chance you could get a top 10 option in exchange. If I could get Courtland Sutton for Garrett WIlson, I think I would do it. I think that's a relatively even trade. And then I also think Deebo is more valuable. Waddle, I think I might rather have, but not by a lot. If you want to just hold on WIlson and get past this rough game, that's perfectly fine. He'll be back in the top 15 pretty soon. I think rest of season, he's definitely a top 20 play, but against Pat Surtain, he is outside the top 30. And at wide receiver 34, this is the cutoff point, in my opinion, for relatively safe low-end flex plays. I think beyond Garrett WIlson, I'd probably be benching most players. But if you told me that Jauan Jennings logs some full practices this week, I will bump him up above the tier break. At the moment, he's questionable, and in a matchup against Tampa Bay, if he's active, I see a lot of upside. So I'm hoping he plays, but at the moment, I'm not so sure, and that does carry some risk. The injury, I think, has been relatively serious for him this year, and if he exits the game early again, I wouldn't be that surprised. He has been banged up all season long, so that's not good. Brock Purdy probably has a much better connection with him than Mac Jones does, and I'm doubting Purdy to be available in this game. So if he's active, he's definitely an appealing option. I would bump him up a few spots if I know for a fact he's full in practice, but because of the question marks at the moment, I think behind the tier break of start territory is a fair ranking. At 34, you could definitely do far, far worse, but I don't think he's a lock in the lineup. Definitely high upside against Tampa, but not the safest play because of his injury risk. So if he is good to go, I would probably start him, but for now, just a floor play, not the best start. I could see Kendrick Bourne eat into his production with Mac Jones. You could do far worse than Jauan Jennings. Let's just make sure he's healthy before you start him. At 35, a player that was tied with Jauan last year in terms of points per game. Jakobi Meyers versus Tennessee, I have right behind Jauan Jennings. And Meyers has been very disappointing. He gets a great matchup this week, but I just don't trust him. His volume has fallen off since the first 2 games. I thought it would grow, especially last week without Brock Bowers. I thought he was a much safer option, and it just didn't happen. Maybe it's matchup dependent. Against Tennessee, you should feel more confident about it, but I still just do not trust him. He has not found the end zone at all this year. I don't feel like that's destined to change. Geno looks like shit. He's been throwing a ton of turnovers, so I can't imagine they're dying to throw that many passes this week. And Tre Tucker has been more valuable. So I just don't see the major appeal on Jakobi other than like a 7-point floor play, especially now that Jack Betch is starting to get involved. I would be worried. I might try and sell high if he scores a touchdown this week. That would be a good opportunity to move him. But I understand why he's disappointing. After all, he did request a trade right before the season started, citing his usage concerns. And it looks like this year he's not getting the most consistent volume, despite 2 big volume games in the first 2 weeks. It's kind of fallen off a bit of a cliff. So my patience is wearing out. I have him in the subscriber league, and I'm tempted to bench him for Darnell Mooney this week. But I think I got to roll with him. I lost Hampton to the IR, and I think Meyers is my safest flex option. But sadly, I don't think he's the safest bet. I'm tempted to rank him outside the top 40, but the matchup is good enough where I will still keep him top 35. But he's below the black line, below my flex plays. And if you don't have the space in your starting lineup, there is no need to force it. Meyers has not proven he is matchup proof. Definitely not a safe play in general. And Romeo Doubs is kind of in the same category, not that safe in general, but definitely some high upside. Doubs has 4 touchdowns this season in 4 games, but 3 of them happened against Dallas. It's possible that could happen again against the Bengals, but I'm definitely not expecting multiple touchdowns to repeat too often. The Packers receiving core is about to get a lot healthier in the next month or so, and I do see a lot of red flags as the season goes on. To start a single Packers wideout feels very risky if both Jayden Reed and Christian Watson do get back on the field. But for now, I don't think either of them will be available in this game. And although I am expecting a major breakout for Matthew Golden, if you told me that doesn't happen and Jordan Love still trusts Doubs the most, wouldn't be surprised. There's definitely top 20 upside for a guy like Doubs. But I think this is a Golden game. I could be wrong, but I do believe Golden is the one you want in this matchup. But if Doubs is still available on the waiver wire, he's a good pickup. Maybe not as exciting 5 weeks from now when the receiving core is healthy, but in week 6, I still think he's a top 40 play. You could do far worse than Romeo Doubs, but just a low end flex option, probably more likely to remain on the bench. At 37, I have Keon Coleman at Atlanta, and definitely has boom bust variance with very high upside, but I don't expect Keon to be the safest bet in general. His fumble last week definitely doesn't help him. It looks like they are shifting back to Khalil Shakir as the main target at wide receiver now. And he was injured in the preseason. Now that Shakir is fully healthy, it does make sense that Shakir is safer. So week 1 for Keon looks more like a fluke as we get further away from it. It's possible it happens again. This Falcons matchup, I think, is a sneaky shootout in Monday Night Primetime, but it's hard to bet on a specific Bills pass catcher. It's just a bit too random in Buffalo. Last week, Curtis Samuel found the end zone, and Josh Palmer feels like he's due. So I'm not convinced it's all just going to go back to Keon. All of a sudden, the fumble is a red flag, and it wouldn't shock me if he's worth benching yet again. He's not a safe play at all. At 38, I have DJ Moore at Washington. Similar to my take on Matthew Golden, rookie wide receivers tend to be more established after the bye week. So if that applies to Luther Burden in Chicago this week, then DJ Moore continues to lose value. He's not been as involved as most people thought. However, I did see this coming. I did rank DJ Moore outside my top 35 entering the season. Now, I did not expect Odunze to have as much value as he did. That was a miss on my part. But based on the first 4 games, my take on DJ Moore has been pretty accurate. He has not been a top 30 option at all. So entering this week, I need to see more production from him. The volume has been bad. It has never been more than 6 targets in a game. He only has one game with more than 4 catches and only one game with over 50 yards. They did not happen in the same week. So really unfortunate. The upside is pretty much gone for DJ Moore, and his only touchdown was when he was wide open against the Cowboys. That's not going to happen too often. So I'm really concerned about DJ Moore. I think he's more of a trade candidate than someone who's going to be staying with the Bears for multiple seasons. The deadline is in week 9. Maybe they showcase him before that, but I do worry they start to get Luther Burden more involved, maybe even Colston Loveland as well, and I see DJ Moore's value diminishing very rapidly. So not going to start him at wide receiver 38. He's a major liability, hyper touchdown dependent, and it's a very unsafe bet to predict. At 39, we have T. Higgins at Green Bay, and Higgins did score a touchdown last week, but otherwise was outshined by Andre Yoshivas. I do not think the Flacco trade helps him very much. So Chase is still the only guy I trust in Cincinnati. Higgins was not a top 40 wide receiver 2 years ago when Burrow also got hurt, and I do not feel comfortable starting him at all. Way too touchdown dependent against Green Bay. No thank you. At 40, Rashid Shaheed is also a major risk in your lineup, but he is actually outscoring Olave in fantasy for the second year in a row. Last year in points per game, he was better than Olave, and his value down the field does offer that upside, but if it doesn't click, you're not going to be too happy. He has offered a 6-point floor this season. There is not a single game with less than 4 catches for Shaheed this year. So he's not the biggest bust candidate. However, the ceiling is rarely going to hit that 20-point ceiling like it did last week. It'll happen on occasion, but I really don't expect back-to-back touchdowns too often in the Saints offense. So not going to trust him, needs that touchdown, and it's pretty unlikely to hit. You could do far worse than Shaheed. He needs to be rostered, but do you have to start him? Definitely not. At wide receiver 40, I think you can find a better play. At 41, I have Josh Downs versus Arizona, and Downs is starting to get back to what we remember from him, but the last 2 weeks, Alec Pierce has been out with a concussion, and prior to week 4, Alec Pierce had been more productive in this offense. He was the better play when healthy. So assuming Pierce returns to the lineup, I'm not going to fully endorse Josh Downs. I still think Pittman and Warren are the guys you want to be starting in Indianapolis. But Downs did have 8 targets last week. He was the most heavily targeted player. It's possible his chemistry with Daniel Jones is just taking a while, and now it's getting going. He was banged up in the preseason. So off an embarrassing Cardinals loss, I think they step up. I don't think it's the best matchup. I'd like to see it yet again from Downs before I rank him in the top 35. With Alec Pierce off the field, I don't fully believe last week was a safe bet to repeat. So with Pierce coming back, this is a wait and see spot for Downs. I think he's more valuable than Pierce rest of season, but it is kind of crowded in the Colts offense. With Warren there, the volume is a little shaky. So he's more talented than Pierce, but I'm not going to start him. I rank him higher, but I could see Alec Pierce continue to be more productive. He gets more targets down the field. At 42, we have Tre Tucker as the last option in this tier versus Tennessee. It is a very good spot, a top 10 matchup to bet on, and he has been more productive than Jakobi Meyers. And with Brock Bowers, not a lot to play, that does increase the upside for Tucker, but I really believe it's a Ashton Genty game like it was against Chicago. So I'm not going to die on this hill. I'm not going to force you to start a Raiders wideout. I'd still rather go Jakobi Meyers, but it's not that much different between him and Tre Tucker. But it looks like the rookies are starting to get a bit more involved. Jack Betch started to factor in. Starting Tre Tucker is still outside my comfort zone. So you could definitely do it and still get like 9-10 points. Not that much different from someone like Olave. But if he burns you, you're not going to be surprised. There's no way he scores another 3 touchdowns like he did in, week 3? Yeah, that's not a good bet to make. So outside the top 40, no thank you. And then beyond this point, I think they're too risky to bet on, but there is some very high upside for these players if the touchdown can hit. They do have massive upside. There's still some wide receiver ones left to be ranked. So at 43, I think Darnell Mooney has some potential, but not sure he's fully healthy. Right now, he's questionable with a hamstring injury, and he did exit week 4 early in the third quarter, but reports indicated they expect him back after the bye. They thought he would recover during the bye week. So in week 4, it was a major red flag with that injury. He only had 1 target on the game. However, in week 3, right before that, he had 11 targets, 4 catches. So I still don't trust Kyle Pitts. I still believe that Mooney is their number 2 rest of season, but to pretend like I know what you're going to get against Buffalo would be a lie. On paper, it is a bottom 12 matchup for receivers against Buffalo, but I'm not that worried about it. I'm just mainly worried about Mooney not showing up so far. He has not given you a good enough game to feel like you should be locking him in to the lineup. But last year he had top 30 upside. I expect at some point for that to return to him. I will rank him there at some point, but at this point in time, it's too early to trust. Keep him on the bench. Do not drop him. If somebody did during the bye, scoop him up. Mooney still has value. At 44, Jalen Coker versus Dallas is a very interesting plug and play off the wire, but he is still on IR at the moment. But I expect him to be activated. I think he'll return to practice and potentially log a full session this week. So I think by Saturday, he'll be good to go. And I do love this matchup against Dallas. It's definitely the best spot to trust, and you want to be starting receivers against the Cowboys this year. So I think the chemistry looked pretty good last year with Bryce Young. It could pick up where it left off. However, Leggett has been vulturing touchdowns, and it is probably just going to be a Tetairoa McMillan type of game. So I would consider stashing Jalen Coker, but it feels a bit too bold to start him off the rip. We haven't seen him this year in this new offense. I just don't know what to expect, but there is value in Carolina. If he doesn't find the end zone, though, you will get burned, most likely. So pick him up if you need depth, but not going to start him. Kind of a bummer. Feels like a wasted matchup. You want to start receivers against Dallas, but Coker in his season debut feels like a major liability. Could give you a bagel, and you wouldn't be shocked. At 45, I got Travis Hunter versus Seattle, and the matchup's not very good. The Seahawks are a tough secondary, but I did like what I saw from him. His usage down the field was very encouraging. So his talent was on display on Monday night, as I thought it might be, but it still wasn't good enough to trust him in the lineup. He only had 3 catches. He was efficient, but still not enough volume to know what you're going to get. So it was a tough matchup this week. It's also a tough matchup. I would remain patient. I definitely wouldn't drop Travis Hunter, but I haven't seen enough to start him as a lock in the lineup. Last week was just a wait and see game to feel if you could drop him or not. So I would hold strong. I have him on one of my teams. I'm happy with last week, but not enough to start. He's fine from a floor standpoint. You probably get like 7 points, but until he scores a touchdown, I don't feel like it's a good bet to make. Trevor Lawrence has not been amazing in the passing game this year. So not going to start him, but not going to drop him. And same goes with Chris Godwin. I'm not seeing enough from Godwin to start him. Last 2 games, the same exact stat line. 3 catches for 26 yards is unusable in fantasy. But week 1, he had 10 targets. Last week, he had 4, and the matchup was far more difficult against Seattle. So maybe it comes back to him. Maybe he has 10 targets against the Niners. This game could easily be a shootout, but it's possible that Sterling Shepard is a better play than Godwin. So this week is another wait and see mode with Evans coming back probably after this game. I'd be probably hitting the panic button on Godwin rest of season. He's definitely going to lose value once Evans returns. So he's just not the same player. The ankle injury is definitely showing signs that he is not the same guy. The volume was so good in week 1. I'll give him another week still on the roster, but you can't start him. It's definitely not safe enough. With only 52 yards total through the first 2 games of Godwin's 2025 season. Not good. Not good at all. At 47, I got Wan'Dale Robinson versus Philadelphia, and Slayton is unlikely to play on Thursday night. So Wan'Dale gets Quinyon Mitchell opposite him. That's definitely a big downgrade. And in 2 games with Jackson Dart, he does have 12 targets and 8 catches, but only 44 yards. That's a 5.5 yards per catch average, and that is atrociously low. Dart is not a safe passer to bet on, and it appears that he has a fixation for the tight end position, especially in the red zone. I think I'd rather go Theo Johnson as a start in the Giants offense than Wan'Dale. I have not seen enough from Dart to trust a Giants wide receiver. The floor has fallen off for Wan'Dale. I don't think he's a safe bet because the yardage has been abysmal. So the volume is decent. He's still a number 1 receiver, but not encouraging enough. The quarterback play is not safe. Against Philly, I will pass on Wan'Dale. At 48, I'm also going to pass on Jerry Jeudy at Pittsburgh. Trusting another rookie quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, not a safe bet. And he did not keep the wideouts afloat last week. It was the worst matchup against the Vikings you can find, so maybe that's the main reason. But against Pittsburgh, I'm not encouraged. Joey Porter Jr. probably going to lock up Jerry Jeudy, just like last week. So not trusting Jeudy. I need to see some consistency out of Gabriel to other positions than the tight end. And in general, the only guy I really trust in Cleveland would be Quinshon Judkins. So no thanks. This is just not the same equation as it was last year. Without Jameis Winston, Jeudy is a much different player. So can't start him. That's why I didn't like him entering the season. I didn't like his quarterback situation. And maybe it picks up with Shedeur Sanders, but with Dylan Gabriel, I do not trust him at all. At 49, I might be way off base here. There's major bust potential, but I do have some optimism on Luther Burden off the bye at Washington. In general, rookies are more established after the bye week, especially in the second half of the year. The bye came early, so perhaps it's irrelevant, but I think it could be similar to Matthew Golden, where during the bye week, they set up some packages for him, and they will take some shots to Luther Burden down the field. That's what happened earlier in the season in week 3. He had a big blow-up game. He had 101 yards and a touchdown in week 3. But on the season, Luther Burden has 7 catches for 99 yards. He literally has 2 games this season with negative yardage. And that is crazy to really think about. 1 game with 101 yards, 99 yards in 4 games total. That is insane from Burden. So it is completely a boom-bust proposition. Way too risky to actually bet on, but in DFS, I actually think it might be worth it. If it does pay off, it's going to pay off big time because it will lead to a 70-yard reception for a touchdown. I think that's really the only path for Burden. But as the weeks go by, I think it's more likely they trade away DJ Moore. I think this time next year, Burden will be a weekly flex play in this offense. But in week 6, not going to trust him in 2025. His rookie season has not been encouraging. At 50, the last player in this tier, major upside with Tyquan Thornton versus Detroit. But until Rashee Rice comes back, it's still a little bit of a gamble to know which Kansas City receiver to start. I definitely trust Worthy in this game. The Lions have been a very good matchup this season. Top 6 spot coming into the week for opposing receivers. And they allow 30 plus points per game. It cannot all go to Xavier Worthy. So Tyquan is getting those deep targets. I think his chemistry with Mahomes is not going to go away. I actually think when Rice comes back, Tyquan will be the 3rd most valuable Chiefs receiver. So in this game, I think he's the number 2 most valuable, and I would consider starting him for the sake of upside. I don't think it's a terrible bet to make. Last week, he had 90 yards, and the deep shots keep hitting. So at number 50, worth a roster spot, but probably going to cut him once Rice comes back. That's not happening for another 2 weeks against the Lions in primetime. You could do a lot worse than Tyquan Thornton. If you're desperate, it could turn in to 15 points. Lastly, though, I'll rip through the last 10 players in my ranks because I always show you the top 60, and I could see a world where all of these guys do pay off, but feels a little too risky to bet on. I think I'm going to pass on Calvin Austin versus Cleveland. He might not play, actually. He is questionable at the moment, but if he does, he has some legit touchdown value this season. It's pretty slim pickings other than DK Metcalf in Pittsburgh. Austin is clearly the next man up. So if he gets a touchdown, you'll be happy. If not, you'll be screwed. Not going to trust him. Definitely not going to start Calvin Austin, but not the worst bet if he's active. At 52, Troy Franklin always offers some upside. Last week, Ryan Flournoy had over 100 yards as Pickens was limited by Sauce Gardner. So maybe Franklin as the number 2 target in Denver does emerge, but I just don't feel like he's the safest bet, especially with Evan Ingram getting healthy. It looks like Franklin is moving down the target list. So not my favorite play, but worth a roster spot. If you told me Mims had a breakout instead of Franklin, though, wouldn't be shocked. I only trust Courtland Sutton and J.K. Dobbins in Denver generally. At 53 and 54, I have 2 Seahawks receivers, Torrey Horton and Cooper Kupp at Jacksonville. And Horton has 4 total touchdowns in his first 5 games. One was a punt return, but still 4 touchdowns, 3 receiving is pretty impressive from the rookie. And Darnold definitely favors him over Kupp in the red zone. So I think he's a legit pickup, especially as the weeks go by and Kupp has more likelihood of getting hurt. Torrey Horton was one of my favorite late round flyers heading in to the draft. I loved him all summer, and he is paying off. I'm really excited about my best ball shares with teams with Torrey Horton. But Cooper Kupp actually is still getting more targets, so technically the safer play, but not scoring touchdowns. I think I prefer Horton from an upside standpoint. At 55, Elic Ayamanoor does have 2 touchdowns this season. He also gets a very good matchup versus the Raiders, so the rookie does have upside this week, but without a touchdown, you'll probably get screwed. And Ridley has finally emerged, so other than Ridley, I'm not going to trust Elic in this offense. At 56, Kendrick Bourne would vault into the top 30 if you told me that one of Jauan Jennings or Ricky Pearsall is inactive. But for now, I think both will be playing, and that means Bourne is not the safe play. But his connection with Mac Jones does go back to the Patriots days, and there is some upside. He was fantastic last time we saw him. So could do worse, but needs some injuries above him to have any value. Not going to start him if they are healthy. At 57, Ryan Flournoy had 100 plus yards last week, 9 targets, 6 catches, and I think it was kind of just the matchup. But if CeeDee Lamb is out again, then the Panthers could offer some upside. They are a bottom 2 matchup against the position, however, so other than Pickens, I'm not going to trust anyone. I started Tolbert last week, and it was a bad call, but there is value. Dak Prescott is playing at an MVP level, and somebody else other than Ferguson and Pickens has to get the ball at some level. So Flournoy, not the worst bet, but only 1 good game in his career. I'm not going to chase the points. It could definitely fall short in week 6, not expecting week 5 to repeat. At 58, the matchup against Dallas is elite, so maybe Xavier Legette scores another touchdown, but with Coker coming back, I think that's my preferred option. I'm not going to bet on Legette. Without a touchdown, you're never getting more than 40 yards. At 59, Alec Pierce versus Arizona should come back. He missed the last 2 games with a concussion, and before that, he was actually more productive than Josh Downs. And last week, Ashton Doolin actually had the most yards in the Colts offense, and he was filling in for Alec Pierce's role. So he does have value, but I do think I'd prefer starting Josh Downs. Feels a little safer. Pierce, though, is targeted down the field. If he gives you 60 plus yards, I wouldn't be shocked. He was the number 2 fantasy play in Indianapolis at receiver before the concussion. Not the worst option, but I need to see it coming off of the injury. Last player ranked would be Tutu Atwell at Baltimore. The Ravens are the second best receiver matchup on the slate this week, so definitely want to trust Matthew Stafford. And although the volume isn't good for Tutu Atwell, it's pretty lousy, the targets when they hit are always deep down the field. If you get a house call from 80 yards out from Tutu, it's not a surprise at all. He is a house call, a 50-yard catch waiting to happen. So Stafford's a beast, not a bad matchup to bet against. Atwell does have DFS flyer potential. If you're desperate off the wire, you could do worse, but you need that deep shot to click. If you don't get 13 points on one play, you will not go over 7 on the game. That's going to be it for this video. These are my rankings at the position, and I did forget to mention the tier breaks as I was going through the top 30. So these are my tier breaks. In the top 2, the elite class is Puka and Amon-Ra, but I gotta be honest, Egbuka is making a case to be above the purple line. The top 11, though, are clearly elite must starts. They are very safe options, locks in your lineup. There's no way you're benching Egbuka, Adams, JSN, London, Odunze, Worthy, Jamar Chase, George Pickens, or Deebo Samuel. Just way too good of an option. But Sutton, kind of a tough matchup on Sauce Gardner, but still not bad enough to bench. Same with Waddle against the Chargers. AJ Brown gets a big upgrade, so not going to panic on him after the Surtain game. Tet gets the best matchup you could ask for, so definitely a must start this week. Harrison going to the Colts Stadium should score a touchdown in my opinion. Diggs has been elite the last 2 games, got to keep rolling him out there. And then Pearsall should have a very high ceiling against the Bucs in a likely shootout. Pittman keeps scoring touchdowns. I'd also keep trusting DeVonta Smith. All 3 Chargers receivers are worth starting in my opinion, so they're all ranked top 25. And Brian Thomas is starting to gain some confidence. I would start him. And I'm also a believer in the breakout incoming for Matthew Golden. I think this is the game where you want to start Matthew Golden. All those players are above the green line. I'm projecting at least 12 plus points for all of them. I think they're the clear must starts this week. At worst, as your wide receiver 2, I think the top 25 are the best options in week 6. But my favorite flex plays would be Calvin Ridley at 26, Terry McLaurin at 27, Metcalf, Khalil Shakir, and Olave in the top 30. And then I'm willing to take a shot on JMO for the upside, despite his lack of floor. I think it's worth it. Flowers could also burn you, and so could Garrett Wilson, but I think they are worth the upside. They have been good this season. JMO, though, feels like one of the riskiest rankings I have on the week. But beyond Garrett Wilson, I think I'm most likely benching them. My preferred options, though, do rank in the top 42. I think if Jauan is full in practice, I'll be ranking him like 5 spots higher. Jakobi's been too disappointing, so even in a good matchup, not a great start. Doubs could have the breakout, but I think it's the golden breakout, so not going to expect multiple touchdowns for Doubs. Keon, a bit of a liability, so is DJ Moore, T. Higgins. Shaheed, boom or bust. Downs, need to see it one more time. And then Tre Tucker, maybe more valuable than Jakobi, a good matchup for him, but probably not going to start him at wide receiver 42. Then with Darnell Mooney, I think I'm definitely benching starters. In the top 50, there is some value. They could blow up if the deep touchdown does hit, but without it, you'll be definitely getting less than 5. And then outside the top 50, Calvin Austin through Tutu Atwell have some merit to be in your lineup, but not enough unless it's a super deep format and you're desperate. With only 2 teams on bye, odds are you're not starting anyone outside the top 40. That's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you next time. I'll see you tomorrow with the Thursday Night Football Start Sit live stream. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.